I'm just about to switch over to the camera on my table. So I'm just, for the sake of the video, which I've just begun to record, we're going to be painting this landscape today. So that's a beautiful scene. It's a country road heading off into the distance. And the nice thing about that is there's a lovely range of lights and darks. So to begin the class, we always start off with a charcoal sketch. So what I'm going to do is change the camera shot over to my iPad, which sits above my desk, and press a few buttons. Hopefully that will connect up lovely. So that's working, and I'll just change it to camera. So now you should be able to see my table and my paper. I'm going to hold my finger down so that the focus stays the same, and we're on photo. So that's my drawing paper, and I've just drawn up a very rough rectangular shape to look similar to the size of the picture that we're drawing. And so today we're focusing just at this stage of the class. We're going to focus on where the horizon line sits, where the mountains sit, and the angle of the road. So this part is just to have a little practice run. So you can see I've popped some grid marks on there for you. Now, you might not need all that detail as far as grid marks go, but it's always a good idea to pop them in when you're doing your drawing, just so you can find your way around the drawing and work out where things sit. So if you have a light grid mark like that, and then you'll be able to see where the road goes within each grid section and the angles of the lines. So I'm going to focus on the road to begin with, and just bring the side of that road up inside that grid mark there. And then you can see that it vanishes off into the distance. I think it kind of goes up a little hill perhaps. It's a little bit misty and foggy, so it's a bit hard to see, but it looks like it wanders off softly, softly up through the fog there. But for this section, it's going over a little hill at the top. So that meets on almost the center line on our picture, just below the center line. So the horizon mark for that part of the painting is just on the middle line. And then I'm going to pull out the side. So what I'm going to do is follow the road first. So bring the side of the road. It's harder to see because it's in the dark. Bring that down through about there. And so in relation to my grid mark, that's what's going on with the road. I'm just going to mute people. I can just see that some of you, I can still hear background sounds. So I've just turned your microphones off. If you do want to speak up and ask any questions or suggest something, please do. This is a class where everybody can connect and communicate and share thoughts and questions. So don't be afraid to do that. So the second line I've just drawn across here is the top of the grass line. You can see the grass line is where the darks and the lights meet. So we've got dark grass on the right-hand side because that's in shadow on this side here. And then we've got lovely light grass because obviously the sun or the light is coming from the left-hand side of the picture. And it's falling onto the tips of all these beautiful little grasses around here. So I'm not going to worry about drawing too much of the grasses in. I just want to really focus today on the angles and the perspective. And you can see on that grass, as it sort of goes away up towards the hills, it just gets a little darker and a little more purple. And as we all know, that as things go away into the distance or further off, they get a little bit foggier and blurrier, and they go sort of blue. We get a lot of blues and purples in the distance. So there's a first little hill at the end of the grass there, which kind of merges into the colour of the grass as the grass leaks back. So we've got beautiful, bright, sunny grass, and then just below your halfway mark, it goes a little bit darker. So that's where shadow must be falling from the hills or the trees onto the grass. And so it starts to darken off a little bit. So I'm just using my charcoal to shade that lightly. and get a little bit of tone happening through there. So this is very, very rough. We're just studying the picture and becoming familiar with where all the bits and pieces are. After that first little hill, we've got a fairly even line of cloud or mist. And so I'm just going to draw the top of that across on my picture. So just so I can find it and figure out where things sit within that. And you can see there's some little trees back in the misty areas as well. So the ones, as I said earlier, the ones that are further away will be softer and lighter in colour. And then as we get closer, so there's a few little trees in the foreground, they're a little bit darker, aren't they? Because they're not sitting in the mist, they're a little bit closer to us. So I've just done some smudgy little smudge marks there to indicate those trees in the far away background, and then to bring a few more forward just by making them a little bit darker and stronger. So you can see over here on the right, we've got three little trees there, not on the right of the road, sorry, left side of the road, but right of the hill. We've got some little trees there. So trees are great in landscapes like this because they just break up the lines a little bit, make it a bit more interesting. And you don't have to put a whole lot of detail into here. It's just literally shape and tone. So look at your black and white version, and that way you'll see how much darker the trees are compared to, for instance, the grass or the mist that's above them in the sky. There's also a tree on the right-hand side of the road, just over here on the edge. And so, again, you can mark that in over there, and that just helps with perspective, helps to tell us, you know, what's happening and where we are and all those things. While I'm back on the road, I'm just going to start to look at the shadows that run across the road there. So you can see, as I mentioned before, the grass on this side of the road, on the right side, is much darker because it's in shadow. And then that darkness kind of bleeds off into the road. So you can see there's bits of grass and there's bits of road kind of merged together in the foreground here. And the line of the grass kind of runs on another angle. So we've got all these beautiful angles that all head off into the one vanishing point, which is quite nice. And so being able to break up your painting into those sections will really help you get your tones and your lights and darks in the right spot. So you can see the grass on the inside here in the foreground and up along the edge of the road is really dark. So that's your darkest part of your painting, other than that lovely blue mountain in the background there up the top. But down here in the foreground is where it's quite dark. And that's what makes it interesting, because as we go back into the picture, it gets a little bit lighter. And we've also got this amazing shadow falling over onto the road, which I really liked. I thought that was quite lovely. And then you've got tufts of grass and things in through there as well. So when we get to do that in the colour version, then we'll have, you know, quite a lot of blue violets and dark, perhaps even blues in there. And then just a few little tufts of grass that we'll just let speak for themselves. So, you know, we're not going to have to spend a whole lot of time getting all that detail happening in there. The other awesome thing I really liked about this picture was the fence posts. So you can see the right-hand side of them is darker because of where the light's falling, especially this one in the foreground. And then again, you can use your grid to figure out where each one sits within the picture. And as they get further away, they get closer together, don't they? And then some are skinny. So we've got a couple of skinny ones, and we've got a chunky one again. So they sort of change shape a little bit. We must have main posts and then minor ones in between. I'm not a fencing person, so really have no idea, but that's a guess. And you can see as they wander off into the distance, they get closer and closer together, but less defined. And I can see there's barbed wire or some sort of fencing wire running through there as well. And so you can represent that with just one line with your charcoal. And that tells us what that is then, if that's a fence. This front post in the foreground could be a bit of fun to play with. We can really have a bit of fun with the highlights and the darks on that one. That'll be nice. And then we've got all that beautiful grass that comes up around it. So that's basically the foreground in a nutshell. And of course, we'll spend much more time on that in the coloured version. So I'm going to move back up into the background now. Now, when we do this in colour, we'll actually start in the background or at the top and work our way down. Just because that makes more sense. It's easier to get in behind things and draw them in or paint them in and then work forward rather than the other way around. You can always go back in afterwards if you want to, but it just makes it much easier if you don't need to. So I'm just marking in that lovely hill at the back there, that beautiful dark hill. I know I said things get softer as they fade away, but they also get bluer. And this one must be, because it's sitting with the mist below it, it's looking a lot darker in comparison. And there was also got a bit of that hill continuing up behind the back of the road there. I'm just going to mark a little bit of that in too. It's not quite as strong as the one on the left because it's got mist or cloud in front of it. And then we've got some beautiful clouds. So you can, just study the tones of that. There's quite a lot of beautiful light areas in the clouds, which is fun to highlight. And then we've got a lovely couple of dark spots too. So purples and blues will be beautiful in there to get those nice tones. And then of course we've got our blue sky. So I'm just going to find a shorter bit of charcoal just to get a bit of tone into my sky. You can see in the black and white picture that it's not bright white. And it's, a very light grey. So to achieve that, I'm just going to blend in my charcoal into the sky. And that way then I can either remove some of it to create white clouds with my eraser, or perhaps leave some of it clean before you colour it in. And I can put a few little fluffy white clouds up here. So that's where the kneadable eraser is really great, because you can take out some charcoal and get some of the whites back in. When we do this with pastel, of course, we'll use white pastels or light pastels. And so even looking at that misty colour, it's not quite white either, is it? It's very, very light grey. So noticing the tones, all those things are very important. And the edge of the tree line, so at the back where the mist and the trees meet, got, that beautiful soft little edge there, and then those tiny little trees way in the distance. They're sort of all faded and further away. And then I'm just looking back at the road. I'm just looking at the texture in the road. It's got those tyre marks through there, so we'll focus on putting a bit of that in there too when we get to it. Oh, and there's also grass on the right hand side of the road. I'm going to pop a little bit through there, as well as that yellowy grassy colour on that side. So I think if you're happy to leave that there and then move on to start the colour version, that's probably enough of a little rehearsal and discussion and a discovery of the shapes and tones and things that are going on in here. And things that, you look at a picture or a photo and you think, oh, that's lovely. But when you start to want to paint it, you really need to break it down and figure out, what's going on in each part and where all the lines and the angles are and how you can make that look realistic with tones and colour. So what we'll do is I'll set up my paper for starting on the colour version of this. Of course, you could continue with the charcoal one later. I really enjoy working with charcoal. So, if that excites and delights you, you might want to come back and refine it a little bit later. I'm just actually picked up a white pastel pencil just to get a little bit of that grassy shape in through that dark area there. So you can always use white pastels or any pastel with charcoal if you're trying to find some highlights or your eraser. You can also buy white charcoal pencils, which is a little bit different in texture and also a really nice thing to have in your toolbox. Alrighty, so let's get started on the colour version. I'll pop this one aside. If anyone's got questions or suggestions, please don't hesitate to turn your microphone on and let me know what you're thinking. So paper colour, I thought I did suggest a few in the notes, but what I've grabbed out of my drawers today was my lighter blue. So I think that'll be quite nice. It'll help, you know, keep the blue in the sky. I can also, it's got a bit of a grey mauvey tinge to it, this paper, so I can see a bit of that in the road as well and in the mist. So I thought that might be a nice choice. If you don't have this colour paper, then what did I say in the notes? Mid-grey or a terracotta green or a mid-blue, or you know, even if you've only got white, doesn't really matter because we'll fill the whole thing up today. So you don't need to rely on the colour of your paper. However, it's always a good option if you know, want to do that and let some of the paper show through. That's one of the, I guess, benefits of using pastel paper, isn't it? Okay, so I have picked out a palette, but I haven't put it in any colour order yet. So I had a look this morning and thought, all right, so what colours are we going to need for this one? I'll just get a bit of paper towel. Have a bit of paper towel handy as well, because when you pick up your pastels and then mix it together, they can get quite dirty. So it's good to have a towel or a tissue or something so you can just give them a wipe, clean them off and figure out what colour they really are, because most of mine look the same. So let's put this into order of tone. I've got white, and you know we save white for last, so that's going to be my highlight. I've also got a very pale blue, so that's also going to be a highlight. I've got a sky blue there, so that's going to be nice for my sky. So they're my sky colours and my misty colours and my clouds. I'll also pop a little bit of purple into the clouds. And for the grass and the greenery, I've got these colours. So there's a bit of blue, and I've got a dark green, and I've got my blue violet. So it's a bit hard to see on that black. This one here, I'll show you, just give it a clean. This one is very red, very violet, but I think I want to put some of that into the dark area because I think it'll make it lovely and warm. It's a beautiful dark colour. This is my blue violet, which is my usual dark that we use instead of black most of the time. I've got an ultramarine blue, so that's going to be nice also in maybe some of the sky and wherever else we feel inspired to put it. There's purple there, only a little piece, might have to find another one. And I've got my big chunk of sky blue. These are not, I've got a white and then a very light blue. I don't know, that might be a bit too light. I might have to swap that one out for something slightly darker, I think. I've got just a little bit. A bit more grey, I think, yeah, that's better. So a bit more grey in the clouds, I can see. So that's a kind of a light blue, but it's got a nice grey tone to it. So that's my palette. And as you know, we can always add to it. So if you feel like you need to, you know, pick up another colour, by all means do that. But it's always good to start with a limited palette and then just see how you go from there. I always try to keep it, you know, to a minimum, although there's a few there today. Landscapes tend to need a lot more colour usually. And of course we can use beautiful purples and things in the shadows, and you know, pale yellows and beautiful apricots in those light grassy bits. Lovely. So make sure you've got a little hand towel with you. I've got mine here, and one end is wet and the other's dry, so I can clean my fingers off and then dry them off in between colours. It's always a good thing to have handy, and it just means you can keep your fingers clean without using wet ones and that sort of stuff too much. Okay, so I'm just going to pop my palette over to the side, and we're going to draw up the structure of this. So we'll fill up the whole page. So what I'm going to do is put my grid marks on first. I'm using charcoal. If you have a pencil or a pastel pencil, not a graphite pencil is not good with pastel. It tends to kind of stain the paper, and it's very difficult to cover with pastel. You always see a shiny silver sort of line showing through. So avoid graphite if you can. And I find charcoal is pretty good. I'm using a dark charcoal or dark one here, so for your benefit, so you can see it. It's also very easy to get off. So if you just press lightly, you'll be able to remove it if you need to. You probably won't need to today because we're going to fill up the whole page. So just measuring up my grid lines because I want to make sure I get my perspective right. Joining those, and just press lightly so it will just blend in with the pastels as we go, or you can take it off, whatever you prefer. A long thin stick of charcoal is good for this because you can hold it loose. So when you're drawing up something, you know, or doing charcoal work, it's good to hold it on the end so that you're not too tight, and to keep it fairly loose. So now I'm checking my reference image, and I'm just going to again draw those main lines in that I could see in the picture. So we've got a bit of a hill on the horizon there where the road sort of dips away, and then you can see it very faintly in the background through the mist, just wandering up the back there. But I'm not going to focus too much on that. So the first thing we need to do is draw in that little bit of land on the right-hand side, so that we get the line on there right, because this is all about perspective, and it's all about making it feel like we're going, you know, along a road and up a hill, basically. So let's follow the line of the top of the grass. So that's where the dark grass and the light grass meet. Now it's an uneven line, but we'll just roughly draw in about where it sits within the picture. I've gone too low there. So it comes all the way across, and it takes up quite a big chunk of the page, doesn't it? And then we've got the line of the road. So that's a little bit harder to see because it's in the dark or the shadow. But I can basically see that it kind of curls down and then out, and then it cuts across this little section here, and then sort of comes down through there. It might be a bit too far. Yeah, it is forward just here. So it comes across. It's all grassy and kind of a bit of dirt, a bit of grass and cross there. So it's not a very defined line, but you can kind of see where it goes. And when we put this in with pastel, we'll use colour or tone to find the edges of things. So there's another line there. It's at the base of the grass, the tall grass on the edge of the road. And you can see there's flatter green grass growing between the tall grass and the road. And so that line comes down through here. And then in the foreground, we've got all this grass and stuff, so you can't really see what's happening on that bottom left corner because it is quite dark and it's a little bit, you know, messy. And that'll be the fun part. Down here in this corner, when we get to the end, we can put a few little light grass marks in there, and that's really going to highlight the grass and yeah, change the painting. So it's always lovely to, you know, just think about that as you go and notice the things that will really give you some little highlights and how you can make light sections look lighter by putting in darker sections next to them and so forth. All right, so then let's go back up to the horizon now. I just want to draw a line. Basically, we'll draw in that hill that's on this side here on the left-hand side. So again, I'm referring back to my grid. I have my image up on my iPad as well, but by looking at the grid, I can actually figure out where everything needs to be on the picture. So that little hill at the back there is just above the halfway line. And then we've got a tree or two here and there. We can pop them in just to give yourself a bit of grounding if you want to. Just squiggle those in lightly. We'll put them in again later because we'll lose all this once we start to put some pastel down. So that's just a rough idea of where that edge is. And then we've got the row of mist or fog. And so that sits about halfway up within this grid section. Now I know it's not a straight line, it's a soft, wispy line, but it's around about there-ish that it sits because we've still got to have room for our hills at the back. And they don't quite get up to that top grid mark or that top grid section. So they sit fairly low in the picture, even though when you look at the picture, it feels like they're higher, but there's quite a lot of sky in this. So I'm just going to mark in those hills at the back there. And then they kind of waft down into the mist. And then over on the other side, we've got a little bit of a hill popping up just above the road. So it's basically that shape. And then above that, we've got all this cloud bank, which still sits within that segment or that grid section, doesn't it? So the clouds all sit, the clouds and the hills and the mist all sit within this grid stripe area. So it's interesting when you break it down and look at it like that and realize that there's quite a lot of sky in this picture. In fact, the top quarter of the whole thing is all sky, and except for that bit of tree on the right-hand side poking out there. You don't have to put that in if you don't want to. It might look a bit weird, I don't know. See what happens. So that's basically the layout for our picture. And it's always a great thing to do at the beginning, just so you make sure you get everything in the right place. So before, we're going to start at the top. We're going to work down from the top. And obviously we'll put mist over mountains and stuff like that. But essentially we're going to go from top to bottom or back to front. And I think that will it's just an easier process. If you're on an easel and your dust is falling, then it's easier because all the dust that falls from the sky into the foreground down here, you can push in later on and it doesn't become a problem. So that's always something to consider. So let's start with some sky. First, I'm going to take out some of that black grid mark because I don't want it to contaminate my sky too much. I'm just going to remove some of that with my kneadable eraser. Because I pressed quite lightly, it's coming off really easily. And so now I know that that area that I've just erased, basically, the charcoal, is where I'm going to put sky. This is a really big chunky pastel, and I'm reluctant to break it because I just really like it a lot. So I'm going to try not to break it, and I'm going to try to use it at this size. See how I go. Because it's a big round chunky piece, I can get a fairly big mark just using the end of it as well. So I'm marking some sky, get a bit of blue in there, and maybe pop a bit of it down a little bit lower as well, just because we want to, reflect what's going on in the sky. So it's always nice to have a little bit of that down in the other areas, some in the little misty bits down here. we'll push all this in and blend it around. So don't stress if you feel like it's too much or not enough. We can come back and put more in. So now I've got some sky in there. I think I might just push this in for now. So the top area, top sky is quite blue. It's really quite lovely and fresh. It's a nice sunny day. That's what's giving us such a nice contrast between the light and the dark. My favourite things to paint have contrast like that. I really love strong light and strong dark. I think it creates a lot more drama. And so I've just blended all of that into my paper. Because I've got a blue paper, I feel like I don't need to work too hard to fill that up. If you've got a darker paper, you might want to add another layer of pastel and push that in as well, just to get it nice and blue. Or if you want to stay loose and you know, work with the paper color that you've got, then maybe you'd be happy to let some show through. Everybody's got their own style and preferences, and it's nice to have a bit of play and experiment with different papers and things like that. All right, so there's my sky. I am going to leave it as it is for now. Just going to pop a few little clouds in. So, you know, I love doing clouds, and it's really easy to do these sorts of clouds because there's no wispy and hardly anything there. So what I've picked up is my palest blue. So I haven't used white. I'm going to save my white for last, or the clouds, one of the two. And I'm just wisping this over in a couple of spots where I can see, you know, really light, soft little fluffy clouds that just sit there in the sky, and you can see through them. They're not terribly strong or big. And then if you wanted to, because I've just wiped the side of my pastel over that, and then just softly, very gently just push that in a little bit, because I don't want those clouds to dominate. What I'm doing is saving the domination for that big bank of clouds that we're going to be doing in a minute. So if I keep these ones fairly wispy and soft and not too strong, then they'll just stay up there in the background and waft around quite nicely. Okay. So next we're going to now build up the bank of clouds, because that's kind of the next in order. What I'm going to do is start with my grey. So this is a light grey, because I want that to be the base for my clouds. That way, when I put the light or the white down, it's going to glow a little bit more. So don't ever start with white when you're doing a bank of clouds like this. You want to start with a darker tone, and then you've got a little bit of space then to add more light or more dark and really build it up. So I'm just going to pop a bit of this pale grey through here. Now notice as you do this, see in the middle there, we've got quite a dark kind of bank of clouds just in the middle. And then below that is where the fog is, and the fog line is quite light. So that's another thing to consider when you're choosing what colours to put down. If the fog line is light, then I need that to be lighter than my clouds, or lighter than that section of my clouds. And so, you know, always thinking about, well, where am I going to put that colour, and how am I going to make that come forward or go back or whatever. But this grey is a nice base for that. And I'm going to push that in with my fingers, because what I want to do is to get it to hang on to the paper and become a nice undercolour that I can then build on. And then when we push it through with your fingers, it kind of will blend in with whatever we put on top of it. So it'll start to create this lovely thick cloud effect. And don't forget, we use the white as well to highlight the really light bits as we build it up. So as I'm pushing this in, I'm just doing small little kind of fluffy movements with my fingers, because that's, you know, the feeling I want to have with these clouds. I just want them to be soft and light. So it's not very different to the colour of my paper. And I could have relied on that, but I still like to get a fair bit of pastel down underneath so that I can kind of build up on it. First thing I'm going to do next, the next thing I'm going to do next, is put a bit of this purple in where that darkness is on the base of that cloud. So obviously there's shadow falling on the bottom of the cloud there. And I'm just noticing where it's a little darker or grayer and popping some of my purple in there. So I've just popped it on lightly. You don't want to press too hard. And then I'm going to push that in softly, softly. So again, soft little fluffy movements. Just keeping in mind or noticing, you know, where this dark section sits. It's kind of like the bottoms of these sorts of clouds are usually sort of flat, and then the tops of them are fluffier. So because this is the bottom of some of the clouds, we want it to be kind of flatter or wider, and then we can put the fluffy tops on it. So they kind of stretch right across, don't they, those dark shadow parts of the cloud. And soften off around it too. So there are no sharp edges. Everything's very soft and blurry and kind of merges into each other. Lovely. So now I've done that, I'm going to pick up, this is my lightest blue. So it's not my white yet. I can still add a bit of white. So what I want to do is just lighten up above the clouds here. So I'm using the pastel on its side. I've got a short piece and I'm just kind of rubbing it around in little fluffy kind of movements to try and get that cloudy feeling. Yeah, you could be happy just to let that sit on the surface as it is, or you might want to blend it all in and really build up a nice, you know, thick cloud feeling. So I'm just pushing this around lightly on the page, noticing where it's lightest and saving the white till the very end. And the white, you know, will just give it a couple of little highlights. You don't want to do anything too crazy. We do want to try and keep those darker sections, you know, sort of in shadow. So I am going to get my fingers in here and just start to soften that off a little bit. Again, small little fluffy movements with one finger, just to emulate the texture or the feeling of the cloud. And what I'm doing is in some sections I'm pressing firmer and softer in others. So where you press lighter, the color will kind of glow a little bit more. And where you press harder, it'll blend in. Because we've got the grey underneath, see how it's starting to form different patterns or different shades of grey or light. And so it's picking up the grey pastel underneath and kind of blending with what we've put down already and creating this really nice fluffy, cloudy effect. And you know, if you want to, you could pick up your grey again and put a bit more over the top if you feel like you need to darken off a couple of spots even more. Maybe that's not quite dark enough. I might need to get another. I'm going to try my, remember I said I picked up ultramarine blue. I'm not sure where I would use it, but just decided to put a bit of that in the cloud as well, just over that purple section and sort of shush that around, because that's again going to create a little bit more depth in there and a bit more interest. And then very, very lightly just pushing it in. I'm not pressing very hard. I don't want to kind of muddy it too much, because the harder you press, the more muddy it gets. So just pressing lightly and wiggling my finger around in sort of little squiggly marks and keeping it kind of loose. So there's a nice sort of range of purples and pinks in there. If you don't like that, then you can darken it off again and make it more grey. It looks a bit stormy with the purple. And now I'm going to come in with a bit of white. So this is where you get to use the white and really create some beautiful little highlights. And so what I'm doing is using the pastel. This is a little square piece, probably broken off from somewhere. And just gently wiping that around in a couple of spots. So what you don't want to do is put it everywhere, because if you do that, it kind of loses its power or its vibrancy. So I'm just noticing, and the black and white picture photo is the best one to do this with, where it's whitest. And I'm literally just wiping that on, just doing little squiggly movements. I might get my fingers into here, I don't know. If you do want to blend it in and you lose some of your vibrant whiteness, you can always come back and pop more on. So I can see, you know, there's a couple of light spots that are quite beautiful. And as I said, don't go too crazy with the white, because you can't go whiter than white. And once you've put that down, there's nowhere else to go. So try not to use too much. And then I'm just very lightly rubbing it in, hardly touching it, but I just want to push it in a little bit onto the paper and soften off those edges so that they kind of merge a bit more. Lovely. If you wanted to, you could come back in with your sky blue. So what I'm going to do is just break it up a little bit on that right hand side and sort of push that around. So you can add colour over the top all the time. Don't feel like just because you've already put that colour down, you can't do it again. You can, and sometimes it's nice to, you know, push it through a little bit more and blend it in to the clouds so that everything kind of connects with each other. So that the sky blue is actually quite nice in with that dark section of cloud, making it a little bit more interesting and reflecting the sky, so everything's connected. If I wanted to really brighten up some of those edges, I'd just get my white pastel again and just touch it on a couple of spots to highlight some edges, but don't do too much. And if you do, just push it in and soften it off a little bit. It's nice just to have a couple of highlighted spots and then just let the rest merge in together. And so to highlight them, you can just let the pastel sit on the top like that and not push it in too much. There's me as I'm dabbing it. Dabbing's good because then you're not kind of blending, you're just pushing it, and it's still fairly vibrant on your paper and doesn't get too muddy. So that's the cloud bank. If you want to, afterwards, you can come back in and keep playing with that. You know, you can highlight and muck around. I find, you know, clouds often need quite a lot of work. Just depends on how much detail you want to give them and if you want them to dominate or, you know, disappear into the background. So I'm still mucking around with it and just adding a little bit more of my lightest blue, not my white, to get a little bit more of a range in there. Yeah, nice. Okay, the next thing we need to put in there is the dark mountain. Now, let's not go too dark at this stage because we can always build that up as we go. And I think sometimes it's better to start off gently and then, you know, as you need to get a bit darker, then we can, because it is fairly dark. If you look at your black and white picture, it's quite a dark feature. I'm going to use my purple because when I put a bit of green over this to darken it off again, the purple is going to be quite a nice undercover. And it's going to also create the distance that we want in that mountain and a bit of shadow. So we've got the big one on the left, and then we've got this lovely wispy one over on the right, which has some cloud in front of it. So we can kind of not spend too much time darkening that one off quite as much. We want to leave that one a little bit softer. the left-hand side of that one is probably the darkest bit, and then the rest of it sort of gets all foggy. So now we've got a bit of purple down there, and it's a mid-purple, so it's just nothing too strong, but it's a nice one. And it's a cool purple. So I've got a bit of that down there now. I'm falling off my words today. Now I'm going to add a little bit of my mid-green. So I'm just going to see what happens. As you know, we mix colours on the paper and not on a palette. So sometimes you never know what you're going to get. If I pop a bit of my mid-green over that, it's a nice green, isn't it? It's kind of nice, and it's dark, but I don't know if it's dark enough. So if you're not sure if something is dark or light enough, the best thing to do is look at your picture and squint. Look at your painting, look at what you've done, have a squint, so look through your eyelashes, and then look at the reference photo and compare the darkness. And based on that, I'm going to go a little bit darker, because that will then make the fog in front of it stand out and come forward. So what I'm going to pick up is my phthalo green. So that's my beautiful dark green. If you don't have this one, then a blue violet or your darkest green will be the best one. And I'm just going to pop that on the top. So just loosely on top, and then I'll blend it in with my fingers, because this mountain, there's really no detail on it. I mean, you know, you can kind of tell that there's trees and things there, but there's no specific detail. So we just want to keep it into a fairly block sort of colour without too much information. So I've patched on some of my phthalo green, and now I'm going to push that in. And you want to try and keep the edges of it fairly sharp as well. You know, I mean, it's a bit difficult with pastels, isn't it, to get a nice sharp line, but against that light sky is what we want to do. We want to get a nice dark mark against the light sky, because that's what's going to help it to kind of pop and stand out. So I've pushed both of those in. I've got a lot of dust on there, so I'm going to tip that off now. So if you have dust on your page, the best thing you need next to you is a little hand towel or paper towel or something where you can tip it all off and then get rid of it later. So that's my mountain off in the mist. It's not exactly the same shape as the one in the picture, but really doesn't matter. That's the nice thing about nature, isn't it? You can sort of adjust things as you go. I'll try a bit of this dark purpley pinky colour in there. That's nice. And so if you look closely at the mountain, I can zoom in on that on my iPad, and you can see there's a little bit of light, you know, catching. So there's a bit of sunlight catching on this side here, on the trees, way off in the distance. And then there's another little bit there. So that's telling me there's ridges in the mountain. And if you wanted to do that with a bit of light green or something, you could do that if you wanted to emphasize it. Or you could just leave it sitting flat and not worry about it too much. If this was something I was going to, you know, spend a lot of time on, then I probably would do all that and get all those little details in there, because it just makes it more realistic then. Awesome. So now we've got our mountains in there, and it's time to pop some mist in front of them. So I'm just going to give my hands a wipe, because we've been working with dark colours, and now I want to pick up light colours again. So the mist is similar to the cloud colours, isn't it? I've already got blue down there because I popped it in earlier. I'm going to use my grey to start with, just to get a base colour down for my mist. You might want to rub out your charcoal marks. I'm not going to worry. I think I can push it all in and it won't be a problem. So the mist kind of runs in front of the mountain, and it has a nice grey base. So it's not bright white like the clouds, is it? So there's no really bright white in there. It's everything but. But the idea is to try to keep it looking fairly grey and misty without making it reflect the light like clouds do. So I've just popped the grey down. Now I'm going to push it in. Because the mist is sort of horizontal, I feel. I might be wrong, but I feel like it's horizontal, running horizontally. And growing up in Canberra and then living in Toowoomba for many years, we had lots of fog. And yeah, it feels to me like it's a horizontal kind of layer. Well, it's a cloud, isn't it? Basically sitting on the earth. And so it does have edges and shape. So pulling that across, I've already got some blue in there, so that's picked up the blue that I put down earlier. I might pop a bit more in. So just have a feel around it and keep checking your colours, keep checking the tones between, you know, where it meets the earth. So you can see the edge of the first hill at the bottom of the mist back there in the middle. And what tone is that? And so the earth or the grass has to be darker, doesn't it? Because this is lighter. And then how do I make the top of that mist in the middle there? So where the mist comes up and meets the clouds, how do I make that lighter? Well, we can use our pale blue or a very light pastel to do that, because we've made the clouds darker underneath. And so now, because that's darker, I can bring in my light blue, my very pale blue, and put a line there at the top of the mist against that dark cloud. So that's now going to give me the definition between the two, basically. And so I'm just running the pastel across. This is a very dry, soft pastel, so it's sort of holding onto the paper really nicely. It's not white, remember? So the white we've used in the clouds, and that's where we want the white to stay. If we put white down here, it'll start to look more like part of the clouds. So we've got to try and keep it a little bit more muted. So the blues and the greys are the ones, the colours that you want to use down in here. And they've got to run across in front of our mountain. And then up on the right-hand side, the mist sort of goes up, doesn't it, into the sky, and it covers up a lot of the hill or the mountain there. So we want to try and keep that fairly soft through there. So I'm running my fingers across. I am pushing it in because from what I can see, it's kind of a smooth texture, isn't it? It's not lumpy or bumpy or anything like that. It's very smooth. And we know it's see-through. We know that we can look through it and see things. And we'll look at that in a second. So if you can zoom into your picture, you can see the tops of the mist against the mountain. It's not a straight line. It's kind of all soft and blurred. So I'm just putting my finger in between the two and blurring off those edges. So you kind of merge the green of the hill down into the mist. Not too far though, because otherwise you'll dirty the mist too much. You just want to soften off the line between the two there. And on the other side as well, I just want to soften that off so it looks like it's wafting over the front of it. Beautiful. So it's much grayer than the clouds. There's also quite a bit of purple in there, I think. That might be a bit dark. Let's see. I don't know. I feel like I can see purple. That could just be the foliage or whatever that's, you know, hiding behind the mist. Just put a bit of foliage in there in the purple, just a very subtle suggestion of that. And remember the road, I don't know if you can see it on your picture, but very, very softly, the road in the mist sort of goes up. You can hardly see it, it kind of just disappears, and you might not even want to bother to try. But it could very, very subtly suggest it, just with a very subtle change in tone. I'm just going to see if purple does anything. I don't want to put too much in there because it'll just dominate, and the whole idea of this picture, well, not idea, but the whole appeal of this picture is the fact that it's also soft and misty. So I'm just layering a bit more grey on. So in the background, very softly through the mist, I can see there's trees. So what I've picked up is a dirty green kind of colour. It's a little dark, but once I push it in, I think it should be all right. I just want that to represent those trees that are sort of far away in the mist that you can't really see, but you know they're there because there's slight shadows of them. And so I'm just marking little marks across through there to illustrate those. And if you look closely, you'll see them on the edge of the grass, just inside the mist. And it's kind of I don't know if this is an ochre or what sort of green that is. It's like a khaki green, so it's not very dark. And I imagine that once I push it in a little bit, it's just going to get sort of merged in, hopefully, with my misty grey. And I can always pop some more mist over the top if they look too strong. And what I'm doing is just dabbing it with my fingers. So just dab, dab, softly, softly, to try and emulate the shapes of the foliage back there, far away, that we can't really see. When you dab these little shapes with your fingers, they sort of automatically become trees or shrubs. It's quite cool. So if you blend, you'll get mud. So try not to push it around too much. Just dab your finger on and off your paper. I think that's looking all right. Not sure about this purple over here now. I feel like I want to get rid of some of that. So what I'm going to do is just come back over with my very light blue again and gently, gently push that around. So it's just, you know, it's all about layering, isn't it? It's all about putting something down and then putting something else over the top and just testing it, checking it. And by putting some of this very light blue back over that and then not pushing it in too much, so it's actually creating a really nice hazy sort of feeling of mist. Nice. And then again, you know, just be gentle, just go lightly, lightly. I always like to go carefully first, and then, you know, if I'm sure about something, I like to make sure it's fine first before I jump in too deep. I'm going to tip off my dust again. And so that's starting to come together quite nicely. The fun part will be putting the foreground in and then getting some of those little trees in the background there just to sit nicely and create the landscape. Okay. I'm going to soften that off a little bit more. So always check your work too. If you feel like you're not sure how you're going, just stand up and step away and have a look, or leave the room and come back. It's always good to do that, just to get another view or perspective. We'll come back with fresh eyes. Okay, so now we've got to find the colour for the grass in the background. So between the grass and the mist. And I really struggled to figure out what colour this was. So what I'm going to do is put this green colour down that I've used for my background trees. I'm going to use that as my line for now. And then probably start to kind of push a few colours around over the top of it. I can see some blue in there and purple. And don't forget the other side as well, on the other side of the road. So just pulling some of that greeny khaki colour across there. And just for fun, I'm going to put some of this bright in here because I always feel better when I can see how it's going to end up. So I've picked this bright orangey apricot colour for my grass, my bright grass, my yellowy grass. And when I can see how that's going to be, that's when you feel a little bit happier if it's not sort of giving you any joy at the moment, because there's always the bit where it doesn't. So let's just block in some of this colour while we're at it. Don't put too much down. We're just getting an idea of where things are. And then we can start working on the detail. So I've got this lovely terracotta sort of colour to put into some of the grass there. And then I've got little light bits that might need a different light for that too. For that part. And then we've got the road. So the road, it was another one I struggled with to find the right colours. It's tricky. It's this khaki green, but I can see orange as well, so we might have to mix the two. See what happens. Yeah, there we go. So it's like a dirty green. You know, often things in Australia often have this green tinge, don't they? It's like a dirty green, olivey green sort of tinge, even in the dirt. There we go. So that'll do for now for the road colour. Cool. I'm going to do one more section in this hill here, and then we'll have a break and grab a cuppa, and that'll give everyone a chance to have a rest or catch up or move on or whatever you want to do. So I'm just going to push in this section back here now. Now that I've blocked in a lot of my colours, kind of got an idea of where it's all going to go. Now I can see a lot of blue in there, so I'm going to have to add some blue. First, I just want to define the edge of this horizon first. I feel maybe that's a little bit too dark in some spots, but I know I can lighten it up. I'm not too worried. This is just about getting the base colours down. And mixing in some of the lights with the dark. Because you can see in the graph, we've got some really nice shadow coming across from the left-hand side. So there's a tree or a couple of trees there that are casting shadows, which is nice. There's also, you know, a softness about all of this, right up until the foreground when we get into the grassy area. So to soften off, I'm feeling like this line here is a little bit dark. So what I'm going to do is just going to go over it with some of my blues, because I want to kind of soften it off a little bit. I don't want to lose the edge completely, because that's a defining part of the landscape. If I pop some of my light blue, this is my sky blue, I'm putting some of it over this because I want to sort of grey it off a bit and soften it down. And you can see in between the road and the grass at the tip there where the road goes off into the distance, it's very blurred, isn't it? So we've got this lovely feeling of mist over everything back there. So see how that blue has just softened off the green, and it's made it a little bit more grey. And that's what I want. I just want it to be a little bit bluer than it was. And so you can experiment with your colours and push them around on the paper and just try things until you get the right one. I do like the blue in there, it's quite lovely. There's also got a bit of darker blues through there. So blue in landscapes is beautiful because again, it gives us shadow and distance and form. By popping a bit of the blue in there, I'm getting a nice little dip in my hill. And again, I can come back in here with a bit of the grey. You've got that little fine row of trees far off in the distance there. So that's this row here, which I probably need to define a bit more now. And then it's kind of misty in front of them. And then we've got a little tree standing on its own in front of that. So it's really just about defining things and making them a little bit stronger or a little bit softer so that it all kind of makes some sense. Remember to clean your fingers off in between each colour too. You end up with a mess like that. And so I've got those trees there, and then I can see down here in front of them it's kind of misty again. So I can use my sky blue through there to get a bit more of my misty blue. I think I might pop a bit of purple in there too, because that's going to help to create some shadow. The purples and blues are beautiful for that. If you want to push it in and kind of soften it off, you can press a bit harder. And if you wanted to sort of have it sitting on the surface, just don't press too hard or don't press at all. Sometimes you just let the pastel sit on the top and don't blend it. And we'll do that as we come forward. So as we work forward and we've got more detail, we'll start to, you know, soften off, do more defined marks and have sharper lines and things, because then we'll have more detail. So that's the edge of that. And again, I can come back over with this greeny colour and put some of these lovely shadows in there. So I'm kind of just pulling my pastel across the page. Now I've put some purple on top. Oh, that's lovely. Purples and greens are delicious together. So nice. Get some lovely effects through there. And then I'm going to push that in as well, because I just want to kind of get it all to merge a little bit. Awesome. So let's have a break. It's 10:38, so we'll come back at 10:45, about 8 minutes or something, 7 minutes, and then we'll carry on. So this will give you either a chance to catch up or carry on or have a cup of tea. So I will be back very shortly.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Jeannie.
Sorry, there we are. Apologies. Thank you, Di. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or anything that you want to say before we move on? No? Okay. Well, if you do, don't be afraid to say. I'm more than happy to talk about stuff. Otherwise, I'm here talking to myself. So what I'm doing is just lightening up some of that grass off into the background, and then I can see there's a few sort of light streaks through there that the sun's catching. And I'm using this nice little apricot colour because I like the warmth of it. It reminds me of sunshine. As I get up to this end on the left-hand side where you can start to see clusters of grass, just doing little, you know, like brush strokes to emulate grass marks, I guess, but just with the stick. So by doing that, we're showing that there's, you know, shadow back here, and then the sun is finding the grass in the foreground here. And then I'm going to have to find a brighter color, I think, to highlight the tops of my grasses on the edge of the fence there, but we'll sort that out in a minute. So I just wanted to get that a little bit lighter through there. So the reason I wanted to make that low, not the reason, but one of the reasons is that I can see on the edge of the road where the grass and the road meet all the way through, it's much darker, isn't it? So I'm just going to darken where I'm talking about. So around through here, there's a lot of dark in there, and I like that the light we've just put into the grasses is going to be a nice contrast for that darkness. You don't have to put your dark in yet. I just wanted to show you what I was talking about. And now I can't stop. Put that down. Right. Okay. So that's quite happy with that. You could add a little bit more of green here and there just to green up the grass in the hill. So we're not looking at the foreground yet. I'm still working in the mid-ground or the mid area where I can see the grasses and the light. And then we can pop a few of those little trees in. So that's going to then begin to give us some feeling of structure and distance. If you feel like you need other colours, you know, I'm kind of looking at this thinking, oh, I think I need another blue, a different blue in there just to get the shadow happening. So don't be afraid to pick other colours up from your palette. I'm going to tip off my dust again. There we go. All right. So again, just keep checking your colours. I keep seeing this blue mist coming across in between these hills here. It's just sort of breaking in front of a little bank of trees that are back in the distance. And then there's more mist across here. So what we're trying to convey is this beautiful, misty, soft, foggy morning. And where the road goes off into the distance, it's very misty there too, isn't it? So we want to sort of soften all that off as well. And don't forget the other side of the road where we've got that little bit of land tapering off into the distance. So just softening all of that off. I just want it really soft and misty, far away in the distance. I'll put a bit of my very light blue in there. Now this is not my white, and I will push it in and grey it down a little bit just to get some more contrast happening on the edges there. So pastels are beautiful for doing cloud and mist like this because you can really layer them over other areas and create some beautiful glazing. So it really does lend itself well to doing this kind of art. because you can see the other colours that are already underneath, and then you can layer more over the top and really gently build up your layers and create a really nice effect. I think that's why I just love doing clouds and things with pastels, because you can just get them to look so good. Okay, so let's pop some of these little trees in so that we've got a little bit of distance going on. And that always helps to tell us, you know, proportions of things and how they fit. So the trees themselves, if I squint at my picture, they're not quite as dark as my back hills. And they're not quite as dark as what's in the front here. But they're definitely darker than anything in the midground. So it's just about finding the right colour to do those in. And I don't think I've got it in my palette. But anyway, I'm going to start with a mid green. I know if I need to, I can go darker. And I can also add a few little highlights. So this little tree here just sits about there. And see how that already gives us perspective. Now we can see, oh, okay, so that's far away. I recognise trees, people do, and we know what their shapes and things are. And it really helps to give you a feeling of distance and where you sit within the picture. So I'm just going to mark in all the little trees with my pastel, this green pastel. I know they need to be a bit darker, but I can come back and do that. What I'm doing is just dotting the end of my pastel onto the paper and creating little leafy kind of marks, I suppose. Now, remember, you know, this tree, for instance, is fatter and shorter. The one next to that is a little bit shorter and kind of leans over to one side. So you've got to try to keep it fairly random so you don't end up with all the trees looking the same, in the same shape. I mean, often they do look similar, but mostly they're all slightly different in shape, a bit like people. So that's pretty much where I want to mark my trees in. This one can come forward a little bit. So the taller or longer, the more defined it is, the closer it's going to get. So if it's further away, you want to keep it softer and more blurred and off into the distance, like we did those little ones back there, which probably could be a bit darker, to be honest. Okay, I've got to go find another colour because I've either got phthalo green, which is far too dark, or the one I've just used. So I need something a little darker, but not quite that dark. Try this one. My greens are my only pastels I haven't sorted into order. They're still all sitting in a box in a mess. There's so many of them. Ugh, this is awful. This is a horrible pastel. I don't know what that is. It feels cheap and nasty, so it's going in the bin. Okay, what else have I got? Remember, it's not a real bright green either, so I'm just thinking I might get a bit of a brown as well. Because as you know, we can mix colours. So this one's a little bit darker. Not a phthalo, but it's just a bit darker. That's not bad. And then I can pop a bit of that over these as well. I think I might grey them off a bit with some brown. Just because they look a bit too green, you know. It's an Australian scene and most of our trees are not bright green. They're more gummy, kind of earthy greens. So I picked up this reddy brown colour. I'm just going to pop a bit of that over it and see if I can grey that off a little bit. Might be a bit too strong, but we'll see. So we want those gum tree kinds of greens here. Hard to find the right green. I'm going to throw a bit of this brown, reddy brown colour down while it's in my hand. Quite nice. Okay, so they feel a little bit too dark, so I'm going to come back again with this khaki green that I had earlier, just to mute them down a bit. So that's better. That kind of makes them a bit more grey. So if you do end up, you know, using colours that are too bright or too out of character for the landscape, so these might be nice in England or Ireland or somewhere where it's super green, or Mullaney. Beautiful up there. But for the most part, Aussie trees are more grey, green. So I'm going to try and stick to those kinds of tones and colours. Remember, the furthest ones away should be softer. So you can, you know, I can dab those off and soften off those marks a little bit. So I still feel that these are a little bit too green. I'm just going to tip off my dust. Sometimes you can't see what's going on for all the dust that's sitting there. So it's good to remove it every now and again. So yeah, I do feel they're a little bit too much, too bright. So just maybe a bit of grey over those, soften them off a little bit. So you can keep playing like this until you kind of find the right tone. It's a lovely thing about pastels, you know, you just keep sort of fiddling around until it gets right. That's better. That's better. And then I can see, you know, some of them have little, you can see some branches. So I've just picked up a pastel pencil. It's a black one, but I'm not going to press very hard. I don't want a hard, dark mark. I do want to indicate tree trunks and things, just a little bit too, you know. And they're always often broken lines too, because you can't see the whole thing. So just a couple of little lines to do that and give them some gravity. I don't know what's happened to this guy over here. He's gone all wonky. Give him a few more leaves. And I'll have to grey him off again. There's also a slither of light on this left tree because it's catching the light. Probably not quite that much. I'll just soften that off with my fingers, dab it down a bit. So trees are tricky. I know some of you don't enjoy doing them. But once you kind of get the hang of it and try not to get too caught up in the detail, it's a lot of fun. I think that might do for now. And keeping in mind too that this tree has to be casting a shadow. If the light's coming from the left, so I'm going to put a little bit of a line down through there with my purple, just to give it a bit of a shadow on the ground. Nothing too strong, but that helps to, you know, give us light and direction of light. And if you put it on the other ones, just make sure they all run in the same kind of angle. Let's put my big fat fingerprints all through there, through my mist. If your fingers are too chunky, then blenders are awesome too. So I do have some here. So they feel like fingers. They kind of got that nice skin texture, and you can use a blender to push your pastel in if your fingers are too fat and they get in the way. These are also really good for just making marks like this, for instance. This one has a sort of an interesting tip on it. And so I can drag that through the pastel that I've put down already. Start to get some really nice marks in there. So don't be afraid to have a play with other things and see what they do. So what that's done is it's lifted off some of the pastel, kind of scratched it off a little bit. And when I tip the dust off, I should end up with some fine lines there, just subtle ones. Yeah, so that really helps to give me the feeling of contours in the ground and the hills and things. All right, so I'm going to leave that as is for now. As I said, it's harder to get back in later on if you want to, you know, say if we wanted to get into the misty bits now behind the trees, it's tricky to get back in and redo it. But, you know, you could always blot your trees off and remove those basically and then put them back in later. So it's not impossible, but I guess maybe I'm just lazy and I don't want to get in and do all that again later. So what I want to do now is just noticing again the tone in these trees. I'm going to put a bit more dark in there. This is my blue violet, which I've only used for my darkest parts so far. Let's get a bit more shadow going on. Okay, so let's move forward towards the road. And what I want to do is just really look at the colours in around here. So we haven't done much work. I haven't done much work in this part here. So what I want to do is just get a little bit more texture in through the grass area that sits behind the fence. That's that golden coloured grass through here. So I've just put a bit of terracotta over the top of the golden colour that I had. And I'm kind of wiggling it around up and down with my fingers because I just want to start to create, hopefully, the feeling of grass growing back there. And then I can pick up my lighter one. So that's my lightest one so far in these tones. And just do a few little lines like this that will help to pick up the tops or the tufts of the grass that are catching the light back there. I'm just going to head back towards the background a little bit, or the midground a little bit further as well, because I just want to lighten up some of that as well. And just start to create some contours in there. So you can see there's tufts of grass that kind of are maybe a bit longer than the others, and they're poking up and catching the light. But they're not all single pieces of grass. We can't see that much detail from there in that section. So just a few little marks like that through that golden grass area on the left side, and then tip off your dust again. And so that kind of just gives me a little bit of depth and contour, and I can soften them off very lightly, just very, very lightly with my fingers. If you wanted to get a bit more depth in there, I might try a bit of this green actually, so that's nice. Because you can see there's kind of clumps, I suppose, of grass. And so this green could serve as being the shadow underneath the light bits in there. And again, I'm just going to soften that off with my fingers, push it around just lightly. And that starts to create the feeling of depth. And then I can come back in with my light again. So it's, you know, you're kind of dancing between the lights and the darks to create that texture. There we go. That'll do. Good, good. Okay. So let's move forward now. So the next thing I want to do is work on, we might work on the road, I think, and get that in, and the grass on the other side. So I've got a bit of a hill over here on the right of the road. So just get a little bit of colour into that. And that goes up past that tree just a tiny bit. Okay. And I'm just going to put a bit of this apricot colour in there as well. So what I want to do is get this side sort of done. So a bit of brown and a bit of apricot in there. And my tree might need some shadow on the right hand side because the sun's on the left. Pop a bit of shadow through there with a purple and just soften that off. And then we've got kind of mist after that, haven't we? So the mist is kind of taking over the horizon line, so it's all a little blurred. All right, so now let's get into the road. What I want to do is get some colour down on there and try to get the right kind of colour happening. So you might need a few different pastels to just mix around until you find the right kind of brown. As I said earlier, I feel like it's got a greenish undertone, so like a khaki, dirty green kind of undertone in the dirt. And I put that down, and I also put down some apricot kind of colour. So together they're making quite a nice combination of that dirt sort of colour that we know so well. And then I've just got this darker reddy brown that I'm going to sweep over, because what I'm trying to do is get some of the ridges or the marks of the ridges into the dirt there. Pull that through there. And we'll put the shadow in later. I just want to try and get, you know, that gravelly look that's happening. It's all kind of rough and dirty. And it sort of sweeps around. So I don't know if you can see, there's like an arc shape. You break this down into shapes. I'll just show you. You don't have to do it this light, but this side is arcing around sort of in that direction. And it's lighter on the top or the right of the road than on the left. So it's sort of telling us the direction of the traffic, or, you know, the way that it flows. Try a little bit of blue violet. I don't want to use too much of that because I want to put that into the shadow later. So again, you know, when you're doing darks, don't go too dark because sometimes you can't get any darker. And if you've got more dark to go, you want to save it for them. So it's just about playing between the light and the dark. Trying to emulate that texture. So there's lots of little stones and things on there, and each one will be catching the light, you know. So, and you can see tire marks and ridges and things in there. So it's really just about breaking it down into light and dark. The road itself is not terribly wide, so we've got quite a lot of dirt and grass on the left-hand side. And that makes up some of what looks like roads, doesn't it? Keep pushing that around. So it needs a fair bit more work, but I just want to get over into this grassy section now and start building that up because it's quite dark. So on the where the road and the grass sort of run into each other, just going to work in there and push that around. I've got a dark browny red colour in there. And I'm pulling it up and down. So I've actually got 3 fingers on my paper. I'm just going up and down to try and get that feeling of bits of grass growing in through there. And we'll add some highlights in a sec. Now there's also what look like, you know, track marks or tire marks in through there as well, in amongst the grass. So I've just used a light grey to sort of maybe get some ridges or contour into the dirt there. And again, just blending that through softly. So it's starting to kind of merge in together. While I'm here, I'm just going to push all these other green and dark in to the paper, because that's where we'll put the grass and the fence. Okay. And now with the, we've got some nice green grass, sort of, I don't know if you can see it, but it kind of runs all the way down on the left-hand side of the road from the vanishing point down towards where we are. And of course that grass runs up into the fence line. But there's just this sort of like, it looks like a mowed grass area. I know it's not, because it's out in somewhere. So it just gives, and what I'm doing is I'm wiping my green pastel just gently over some of that road area on the left now, just to start to create that feeling of grass growing through there. And I've literally just got my pastel sticks down on my paper like that and pulling it kind of in little up and down movements, because what I'm trying to do is emulate the texture or the direction of the grass. While I'm doing that, I'm going to pull some of it up into where it needs to be on the fence line there. So get some blocking in done for there. And so pulling that grass around over the dirt here in the foreground is probably enough, and it really doesn't need, you know, to be blended or pushed in or anything like that, because it'll just turn to mud, and we've already made mud. And what we want to do now is get this grass to kind of sit on the surface. So we're heading in towards the fence. That's going to be the last bit we do. I know I said front to back, but anyway, that seemed a logical process for me. But in the foreground here, we've got these little tufts of grass, and they're just short little bits of grass. And what I'm using is my khaki green. So the green that I use to make those trees wander off into the background, just to highlight some of this grass in the foreground. And because it's in shadow anyway, it's not going to be catching the light like the tops of the grasses will on the fence line. So I think for the most part, there's a little bit catching the light right in the foreground there. And there are a few breaks of sunshine coming through further up there, up around here. But for the most part, this grass is not super bright. It's just, you know, a mid kind of green that's in shadow. So I don't want to put too much of a highlight into there just yet. I want to kind of keep it more muted, so that when we put the bright grass in, that's really going to pop. So I'm just doing small little light marks here just to mimic grass. So just little grassy marks all through there. And try to keep them random. So, you know, you don't want to make a fence or build patterns or anything. So try to keep it fairly natural looking and loose, and let some of that dirt show through in some sections. so that it's not all covered in grass. Okay. Now, what will we do next? I think I'm going to start building up the thickness of this grass that's along the edge here. So what I want to do is get that really dark down in through the base, the bottom of the grass, because that's where the shadow is. There's a lot of shadow through there, and it's quite dark. So, and that goes all the way up to the top of the road. And it just means that then when we put the brights on, they're going to pop. So it's quite dark down in there, isn't it? You could also even put some of this blue violet down into the grass on the road section just to darken off in there as well. Lovely. And then I'm going to push that in, because what I want that to do is become the base or the background, so that we can build the grass up on top of it. And of course, it'll be dark green, this grass, or dark colours, because it's catching the light only on the top, so it's mostly in shadow. So, but we're trying to give the impression that, you know, this is dark because the light's on the other side. And remember to kind of pull your finger in the direction that the grass grows. So this grass is kind of more upright and vertical. So if you pull your finger in that direction, then it'll start to have that impression. What I'm doing with my finger is I just kind of keep it on the paper most of the time when I'm doing this sort of thing. And I'll just very lightly pull it up and down. And that way it's pulling the colour around just gently, gently, and it's creating the feeling or the direction that I want it to do. Okay. And so inside of this grass, I'm just looking for my dark green, there it is. My phthalo green, I just want to get a bit of that in here as well. So what I'm doing is I'm just doing a few grassy kind of marks with my phthalo at the base of this grass line. I'm trying to build up some depth of tone. So I've got my blue violet down first, and now I'm going to put my phthalo down and just start to try and build that up. As I'm doing this with my phthalo, heading back up towards the top of the road, I can see that the green grass on the side of the road needs to be greener. Funny, isn't it, how you kind of notice those things as you go? Oh, okay, that's not green enough. It needs to be a little bit brighter than that. I don't want to go really bright, because that means it's going to have sunshine on it. But it does need to be a little lighter. Cool. And now we're just going to start to layer some grass through here. And don't forget, you can come back in with your dark again and darken it off. So if you lose some of that depth, you can always come back. So this is my mid green. I'm putting some of this in here too. And just starting to build that up. Remember to try to keep your marks random. You don't want to have the same size mark all the way through. And even though they're vertical, they're slightly angled too. So just like big clumps of grass that are natural and wild. Cool. Now we've got to put highlights and things in there as well. But first off, I want to get the fence posts in. So let's do that. And the ones that are further away, oh, I'm going to tip my dust off first. I can't see what I'm doing otherwise. So the ones that are further away, up in the distance there, I'm just going to put little grey marks in there with my light grey pastel. Probably too many. Dab them off. I just want to have those far away and not too bright, because we're getting this fence to come forward and closer to us. And as it does that, it's going to get, the posts will get brighter and bigger. I've lost my grid mark now, so I can't remember where what goes. But anyway, let's just figure it out. There's the halfway line's there, so that one's just slightly to the right of there. And then we've got a bigger one to the right of that one. So remember I said before, it looks like there's like a main fence post and then two thinner ones and then another main one. Seems to be the pattern. And so based on that, we can put these marks in. And as they get closer to us, we see more detail. So this one that's closest on the left, he's the tallest. And what I want to do is get these in now so we can put some grass in front of them. So that's my theory here. That one's in the wrong spot. So let's work on this one closest. So it's got a dark side and a light side. So I'm going to darken off the right side because that's where the shadow is, and it goes down into the grass. This is the wrong brown, but never mind, I'll sort that out in a minute. And then we've got another one there that's dark too, so similar sort of colour. I need to remove this one because I got it in the wrong spot. I can always put some grass there. Nice long grass will do. Cover up that little mistake. Pastels are wonderful, aren't they? You can just cover stuff up. Okay, so now I just want to grey off this post in the foreground a little bit. So I'm just going to run my grey over the brown to kind of blend them together and get that nice wooden fence kind of colour. And I'll do the same on the other one, which is the every second, third post along, so that they look like they're kind of related. And then we might darken that off even a little bit more. Try a bit of blue violet. Because when you squint at that or look at your black and white picture, you can see it's actually quite dark. So that's one of the features, I suppose, you know, the contrast or the drama, telling us where the light is. There we go. And so the little ones, the other skinny ones in between the chunky ones, also have a darker side, but it's not as dark as what we've just done on these two. So I'm going to pop a little purple stripe just down on the right of those, because again, they are also, you know, a 3D thing, and they've got light on one side. So we need to make sure that they look like that and they're not just a little white stripe or light stripe. So that's looking fence-ish, I think. I'll just brighten this one up a little bit more because it's slightly closer to us. And the purple on the right has given it enough shadow just to give us that information that it's a solid object. If we wanted to, I'm thinking I might go and get a light golden colour, very pale yellow, sort of my shiny bits of grass, because I feel like I want to make them glow a little bit more in the sun. So I also want to add that to my fence post. So this is a pale yellow We'll put a bit of that on there, catch the light. That's nice, that warms it up. Lovely. Might warm these ones up a little bit too, just with a dash of pale yellow. Now I made it crooked. There we go. And then we've got the fence wire as well, which is a little darker, isn't it? You might be best to use a pastel pencil or a thin stick of charcoal to put that on. The charcoal might work all right. So I'm just going to do it lightly, because if you go lightly, you can always get it off. Just press very lightly. We don't want a heavy dark mark. Just want something fairly light, just suggestive, nothing too strong. So I put in the wrong spot there, should have been higher. That's just enough to indicate that there's, you know, a slight fence wire there. And so, as I said, if you press lightly, it means that you can take it off or dab it in if it's too in the wrong place. There we go. Make that one a bit taller. So now we need to work on our beautiful bits of light grass up here. So what I'm planning to do is kind of just start to highlight. I know we're going to go over some of the fence marks, but that's okay. Highlight just mostly around the top, and some of the, just in the foreground there, it's a little bit lighter, but mostly around the top of the grasses. So quite green, isn't it, on the edge there where the sun's hitting it. So if we just lighten that up, it's a bit of lighter green, and then I'm going to put some of my yellow in as well, just to give it some sun. I'm also going to use this, before I use my yellow, I'm going to use this apricot-y kind of colour, because I can see a lot of that in there, sort of on the edges, isn't it, of the grass line. And so this is the thing that really caught my eye, I suppose, for this picture, was all the beautiful light just on the edge of that grass, catching the sunshine, and then, you know, having that beautiful shadow down below the fence line. So I've used some of my apricot kind of colour that I use quite a lot of in the other grasses, because what we want to do is have continuity. You want to make sure that, you know, everything talks to each other and it's all related. So because I've already used this one, I feel like I can still keep having that in this grass here, because it's all connected. And then for the really light bits, I'm going to use my light yellow. I might just grab my green and pop a bit of light green just down in a couple of spots on the dirt where I can see it's catching the light here in the foreground. And we'll put the shadow on the road too in a minute. See how that definition, or making this brighter here and sharper, brings it forward. And then as you head off into the distance, it gets more blurred and softer. So we want more detail and stronger marks and colour here in the foreground. And then as it wanders off, it gets less. So now I'm going to pick up my light yellow, and I just want to get some really light yellow into the tops of these tufts just here on the left-hand side. You can see they're just catching the beautiful sunshine just on the tops there. It's lovely. A few more further along. This is quite a hard pastel, so it's not holding onto the paper quite as nicely as I'd hoped. But that's giving me that nice little shine. And then I can see that in a couple of spots just in the grass here on the dirt in the front there. So just not too much, you don't want to overdo it. And then there's a brighter green bit up here. So just noticing all the little different sections and the brightness of colours. It's a bit too bright, isn't it? Kind of glow in the dark now. Okay. So that's starting to look how I imagined. Next thing we want to do is work on some shadows on the road. What I'm going to do is use the charcoal, because the charcoal is soft and I still want to be able to see kind of the road underneath it. So I'm just going to kind of gently pull that across. I know it's creating a lot of dust. I'm hoping when I tip it off that it will give me just enough of a mark for a shadow on the road. And make sure you vary the length of it, you know, just look at the shape of the shadow that's there. There's gaps in there too, where the sun's sort of shining through, and then there's longer shadows running across. And just make sure you keep them horizontal, so they all run horizontal. And it's basically the shadows of the grass, so we want to keep it kind of random if you can, but running horizontally. And then I'm just going to taper that off up into the end of the road, because it's quite strong shadow up there still. I'm hoping that the charcoal's not too soft and will stick to this. Very crummy. If the charcoal doesn't work, then we can try the pastel, blue violet pastel. I'm just going to tip my dust off again. Yeah, it's coming along quite well. I think I want to put purple in there though, because purple's just so yummy. So I'm going to pop a bit of purple over the top now of that charcoal. Oh yes, that's nice. See how the purples and the greens just create the most delicious shadows. Lovely. And it just warms it up too, doesn't it? You know, I find charcoals and greys, as great as they are, they kind of dull things down a little bit. And even though we're doing realistic painting, you don't want it to look exactly like a photograph. So by adding, you know, some purple and more colour, then it kind of just makes it a bit more arty and a bit more interesting, I think. And this way you can kind of wipe the purple over some of those green areas in between the grass and the road and get that lovely shadow colour. So we're going to wind up in a minute and have show and tell, see how you went. Still feel like I want that darker. Okay, let's do it. Blue violet. This is why I go gently, because I just want to make sure it's, you know, not too dark or too light. And I might darken up some of the grass too at the base there, because we've gone over it with the greens and it's lost some of its darkness. So that's going to kind of highlight the really light bits again. So this is the end bit where you all get to kind of just, you know, play and touch things up and refine. Tip off my dust. Lots of dust. I want to see if you can get a little vacuum cleaner thingy that you could just hover over it and get it all off. That'd be cool. Just going to lightly push this in just because it is dusty and I don't want the dust to sort of sit on the top too much. And sort of grey off that area a little bit to soften it down, so that as you come forward again, we've got more detail in the foreground there. So highlighting those little light bits just makes it look like sunshine, doesn't it? What happens if I put a bit of light there? So I'm just talking to myself now, figuring what would happen if I put a bit of sunshine just on a bit of the dirt road here that isn't in shadow, and it kind of, yeah, just lightens it up a little bit there. And if I keep it fairly light, it's going to pick up the texture of the paper, so it still has that reasonably gritty sort of look. And as you know, I really like dark and light, so I'm just going to keep adding some more dark until I'm happy with that. Push it in lightly. So sometimes when you're pushing colours in like this, you want to wipe your finger off in between each swipe, just so that you're not putting dark down again where it's not. So you'll figure that out. Nothing worse than a big black fingerprint in the middle of a cloud or something. Okay, I'm just touching up a bit more grass through there. And I think that's just about done. I can't wait to see how you went, ladies. So we'll do that in a minute. What time is it? 11:38. So 2 more minutes. 11:40. We'll do. Have a look and see how you went, and answer any questions if you have any. See what you thought.
Yours is amazing, Jeannie.
Oh, thank you.
It's so
thank
good.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Really,
I just
really
get lost. Thank you.
Yeah.
I get so lost in it, you know, and then, yeah, you look up and think, oh, right. Thank you. I want to see yours. And everyone's.
My camera's not working.
Oh, that's right.
It's really not.
All right. Well, I'll have to have a look on the weekend then.
Yeah, I'll send you a photo.
Or something. All right. But we will definitely do a group thing in a minute anyway. I'm going to get a photo for marketing purposes, because that's what you do. Good, good. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to the group screen now. If you've been watching this video, then thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, please get in touch with me. And I'll go back to the group now. There's everybody, all your smiling faces. Lovely. How did you go?
Well, you know me and landscapes, Jeannie.
Not your favourite subject, Leslie? Wow. Do you know what I saw as soon as you put that up?
You see it, Jim?